Wie versprochen, ein nächster Impuls in schneller Taktung. 10 Minuten C2FO. Und es ist mir eine große Freude, Dan Beams vorzustellen. Wir haben uns auch vorher abgestimmt und Dan sagte, er lebt seit 2007 in der Schweiz. Jetzt wäre der Challenge mit englisch-amerikanischem Background auf Deutsch mit Schweizer Akzent in Berlin zu präsentieren. Insofern hat er sich entschieden, we switch to English, and pleasure to have you here. Dan is Managing Director and responsible within C2FO for Switzerland, Austria and south of Germany. He comes like myself from the investment banking originally, so he brings quite a broad experience on finance with him. Corporate finance, treasury I've read, risk management, so you've been all through that once. And he's obviously been with some of the fintechs on the payment side. So expert on the finance part. And what can he show us within the next 10 minutes? It's all about inflation. So probably after the COVID-19 crisis, we will face a bit more on that. And what is the impact on supply chain? I think that's one of the things we can hear, and how to strengthen supply chain health with dedicated financial products. That's really the experience you guys can bring to the table. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for allowing me my time in the sun to talk about C2FO. So C2FO is essentially a working capital solutions company. One of the issues that I'm going to talk about today, which may or may not excite you, is the discussion of inflation. So I'm not going to talk specifically about inflation, because I'm sure we're all very aware of the situation that we're in at the moment, certainly looking at the figures that we see before us. But what I want to deal with is how this affects your supply chain and the health of that. So there is currently lots of cash within the system, but there is a very uneven distribution of that cash. So for the smaller to medium-sized corporates, the issue being is that cash generally from normal means isn't available for those suppliers, or is available at very high rates. Obviously, the banks moving into this particular region now are de-risking their portfolios, not wanting to lend to the smaller organizations. Paying down the debt, both from yourselves, also from your supply base as well, is very expensive. And as I'm sure in the procurement organization you're aware, obviously the increasing costs of raw materials are pushing prices up across the board, but also your suppliers from purchasing those items have less money to invest into R&D and to other areas of improving their business. So what you might not be aware of, obviously, many of the companies that we talk to have thousands, if not tens of thousands of suppliers in their supply chain. To understand exactly where the financial needs of those suppliers is at any one point in time is sometimes an impossible task. It's very difficult to manage that. One of the examples that we have, and many of the ideas within the market, is that there is cheap, affordable access to cash for the majority of suppliers, but we ran a working capital survey at the start of this year, and looking into the small to medium size, what the cost of their funds were. As you can see from the graph behind me, over 50% of those SME suppliers are paying more than 8% APR for access to cash. Now, for some organizations, they will be able to support that amount of borrowing. For many, that may actually drive those suppliers into bankruptcy and then obviously causing issues within your supply chain. One of the key barriers that we see with access to these funds is how quickly and efficiently this whole program works. How quickly can suppliers onboard to existing programs? How quickly can they onboard to cash discounting programs, etc. globally, where some may not be available. So the speed of that approval, the availability of that cash is of paramount importance to those suppliers. Just reiterating the statement from, in terms of the knowledge of the supply chain. So typically when you're looking at managing strategic suppliers, strategic spend, perhaps you're looking 5 to 10% of the overall supply chain. The further you go down that list, the less you know about those individual suppliers, typically, when we're dealing with tens of thousands, for instance. Certainly when you're down at that very low level, you know little about what their stresses and strains are. Also from an environmental, social perspective, also from a sustainability perspective, how can you onboard these suppliers to work with you to achieve your sustainability goals if it's very difficult to get that information and incentivize those suppliers to participate? So with that, I'm just going to move to a little bit of a live demo of how we systemize that and actually provide access to that to the suppliers. Now, the example that you're seeing behind is actually a live site. So we create microsites for all of our clients for the suppliers to onboard. They're available online, they're available via the mobile app. Importantly as well, if you have an existing supplier portal, it can also be built into that as a white labeling type facility. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to show a mock-up of the Philips site in this particular example. Now, to get access to supply chain financing, typically you're looking at months of contractual work to onboard suppliers. With the system that we enable the suppliers to use, it is a case of just activating your account. When the supplier logs on, they will be able to see all of the invoices that they're able to accelerate for an early payment program. As you can see here, this particular supplier is active in 2 markets, one being Philips, one being Amazon. In terms of how these suppliers are paid, these can either be paid with own excess cash that you have, so therefore discounting your cost of goods sold, reducing the cost of that, or you can go down the traditional supply chain finance route and do your financing through third-party financing options. In this particular example, there are 2 markets of each. So if a supplier wanted to accelerate invoices so that they can get paid earlier, they can do so on either an invoice level or actually on a global level for all of their invoices. So I'm going to do a particular example here where they're configuring an offer on all of their invoices. So in this case, we're looking at annualized percentage rate. So when I put 7% here, it's not a 7% discount that they're offering on their invoices. This is an annualized rate. They go in, they set the offer, they understand, because this integrates with your own payment process, this supplier will be paid on your next payment run. It doesn't interfere with your traditional AP process. So they're aware that if their offer is accepted, it will be initiated on this particular date for the payment and they will get funds thereafter. So what essentially you're seeing here is it's giving the transparency, it's giving the ability for a supplier to onboard very quickly onto the system, and it's giving them access to liquidity very easily. Now in this particular example, that liquidity comes from yourselves, from your own companies, and it's very transparent to the supplier. They can see for the €100,000 that they have in the system, for the discounts that they're offering, €774 to be paid on average about 40 days early. So by doing this, you're getting the liquidity to the suppliers when they need it, but also from a sustainability perspective as well, you can put in various different markets. So you could put a very low rate market in for those suppliers which you wish to onboard onto your sustainability pledges. So, 1-2% markets, for instance, so that they're able to get onto this. And the ability here is it acts as an incentive for those suppliers to share their data with your organization around their sustainability goals and actually participate, a way of tracking this. So this gives, it's a very, very brief overview into the system. From a buyer perspective, so what you see as an operator of the market, if you're using the dynamic supplier finance, for instance, you're able to track exactly your uses of funds across the multiple banks which you can onboard onto the platform. So it is a multi-bank SCF platform as well. So you're not having to log into multiple systems. They can all work through here as long as those banks support the digital onboarding necessary to make this a very seamless supplier experience. So with that, I'll pop back. I'm running out of time rapidly here. Go back to the presentation. So it really is that easy to onboard these suppliers. I say it's a very short time for me to be involved today. There is a QR code up there should you wish to get a little bit more information on the solution. Also, please stop by stand A4 to have additional conversations with myself and my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. First, quickly, any questions from you guys? Then I might jump into one saying, okay, Philips we've seen as an example. How many of these suppliers, or what is the share of purchasing volume, or how can we measure adaptation of the market?
For the onboarding process,
on the supplier side.
So on the supplier side, you're able to see a complete snapshot of all the suppliers that are participating in the market at any one point in time. You're able to see the frequency, the types of rates that they're offering into the market. So you really can reach, whereas traditional SCF is only really the first 5 to 10%, you really can reach the entire chain of your suppliers because there isn't this complex onboarding and sharing of data that's needed.
Okay. And if I want to try that out, with whom behind me I need to come to you? Get the accounts payable department in line, I guess, is important.
Yeah,
but what is the change really if you want to get this thing implemented in your own company?
Yeah, so typically it's a multifaceted process. You know, Treasury have a stake in this, accounts payable do, procurement have a much larger stake now. It's an evolving area which we're dealing with because it can really move the needle in terms of income for the business, but also from a working capital generation perspective.
So making best friend with the CFO is probably the right person to start with.
Exactly.
You will be at the...
I will be at the stand shortly after this as well.
Perfect. For any further questions, we come there. Thanks a lot. Your applause.